All right, we're going to start now. Good morning, everyone from different cities around the Philippines. For those who don't know me yet, my name is Jonice, and I will be your host for today. And for those who is asking who am I in Turnitin, I'm actually one of the sales territory manager for Turnitin. Please settle in, settle down, and I would like to thank everyone for joining us on our last webinar event for 2021. It's such a wonderful topic about integrating assessment into the curriculum to leverage student learning, as it is an issue that is becoming more and more prevalent in the current situation. I know you're all eager to know what we have in store for today. So I will not keep you for long and have Nina set out the rules for the duration of the webinar. Nina?
All right. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Okay, so good morning again, everyone. So my name is Nina Victoria Benabajo, a professional and education service consultant from Turnitin, Philippines, and I will be your moderator for today's session. As mentioned by Jojo, our topic for today is integrating authentic assessment into curriculum to leverage student learning. Before we begin, I have a few housekeeping notes. Use the chat box for greetings and thank yous. And also please use the Q&A box for your questions to our keynote speakers and panelists. You may also include which panelists or speaker you want to address your questions to. And note that only questions placed within the Q&A box will be responded. Kindly fill the attendance and feedback form found in our chat box. And within a few days, we will be sending the certificates to close those who have filled out the form. And the video recording and presentation materials will be sent within 48 hours after the event. Thank you so much. All right. So assessment plays an integral part of every student's learning. Our goal in the next couple of hours is to provide you insights on what authentic assessments are, its implications in pursuing a change in teaching and assessment methods, as well as how technology can help higher education institutions gain confidence of ensuring that academic integrity is carried out throughout the course syllabus. This time, let me introduce our keynote speaker today, who is based in Australia. She is Adjunct Associate Professor for School of Allied Health, Human Service and Sport at La Trobe University, Australia, and has been a visiting fellow at Trinity College, Republic of Ireland, and Queen's College, Northern Ireland. She is on the editorial board of Australian Social Work and is a regular reviewer for the British Journal of Social Work, Social Work Education, and Social Work in Healthcare. She is also a member of the accreditation panel of the Australian Association of Social Work. She is an active researcher in curriculum development, field education, and health social work, having worked in as a team leader in the emergency department and intensive care. As of 2020, she has written 2 books with one of its 5th edition, 13 chapters, and 40 peer-reviewed papers in scholarly journals. Let us all welcome Dr. Helen Cleek. Take the stage, Dr. Cleek.
Thank you. So you want me to start now, or are we going? We've got some other work, haven't we, to do first?
You can share your screen now, ma'am, and start the presentation. Okay.
Okay. All right. Let me go up. Okay, so good morning, everyone. Good afternoon here, and I'm really happy to have met you all and hope that we have a very robust discussion. As you can see from the look of me, that I've been around for quite a while, and I started academic work in the 80s when things, of course, were much different, much smaller class sizes, and so we got to know every student, and we could engage with them in a lot of small group discussion, and actually had a very good idea of the genesis of their assignments, because we knew how they operated in class. So it's a brave new world now. So I'm just going to move on to acknowledge, as in Australia, we acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, on which I'm meeting today and acknowledge the important role that Indigenous people continue to play within the university community. And that's how we usually start all our presentations, to recognise that we're on someone else's land, and we're acknowledging their rights and human rights. So I hope this agenda for the next half hour is going to meet some of your needs for why you registered today. Just basically starting with, why we're having to make this change, what are the things that are shifting in higher education. But the main game of today's presentation is looking at authentic assessment, which is something, from what I gather, is not new to you, but have you actually applied in practice? So I'm trying to give you some examples and to show you how to map some of the thinking around your curriculum to what students need to learn to be good professionals or good graduates, or and have the right outcomes so that they're going to be employable. So I'm giving you a couple of examples, and then we move on to looking at academic integrity and academic and assessment security, and what it means for teaching and learning as yourselves as professionals and as educational designers. I'm not sure of who the audience covers today, but I'm hoping that it hits some of the questions that you might have. So I don't probably need to tell you that the metrics of how we assess our fit in higher education has changed, and what used to be just good teaching practice, that we may get a bunch of flowers from a student, or would get we're pleased when they receive high marks, or we hear that they have got excellent jobs. Then we felt that we've done finished our task of being good teachers. But things are really changing, and it definitely preceded COVID. COVID really hasn't changed the way, it's accelerated, I suppose, how we interface with students in today's teaching and learning environment. But things were moving a lot earlier than that. I mainly have the example of Australia here, but certainly I've worked in the island and the UK, and did some work also in India. So I could see that some of this development was going on there as well. And what the new metrics are for how we assess university performance, how they rank globally, and of course, if you're looking at attracting students, high quality students, then they do their homework, don't they? They Google and they talk, and they look at university records and how students fare in lots of different metrics, and what and how our universities get funded, particularly in Australia, is basically on some of the outcomes. In the past, like, I'm not sure what happens in the Philippines, but if you still receive what we call bucket funding, just receive the same amount of money each year, and then you get topped up by charitable institutions and bequests and those sorts of things, where we're now looking at how we perform on the global stage, but how we perform in terms of student outcomes. And so we're ranked according to student feedback about our teaching. We get ranked on student retention in our programs and graduate employment. And so every year students do an outcome survey, which is publicly available. And so everyone can see how students thought about their university life, and we also understand more about how our teaching has influenced their learning. So these are now mandatory in all our universities, and again, I'll be very keen to hear what happens in other places. And I know there's people from Thailand here as well, so it'd be great to have a discussion on what the universities require you to do, and what happens if you don't meet the certain indicators that are now around. So in essence, higher education is increasingly focused on student experiences and the outcomes for them in terms of their really, whether the marketplace grabbing them and saying, this is a student from this university, we know that they perform that the outcomes for us taking on a graduate from there is going to be very good. So to be competitive in the global economy, higher education has to recognise that the model of education that we've been traditionally using, with its emphasis on rote learning and exams that usually occur at the end of each semester, is not really adequately preparing students for future work. And we hear terms like student agility, flexibility, hitting the road running, work ready, those sorts of terms. Certainly we have them here. So how do we transform our curriculum so that they are ready for the world of work? Luckily, technology has kept abreast of all this, and the input of LMS platforms and incredible software that's available through many other platforms make it easy for us to provide the resources.
Hello, Dr. Cleek. Sorry to interrupt you. Your slides are actually not shown.
Oh,
yes.
Okay. I'm very sorry. I'm seeing them. Let me see if I can change the view.
Not a problem.
Oh, I'm very sorry. I'm glad you said that. Present. All right. Are they showing now?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Okay. I'm trying to get exit full screen. Okay, so
yeah, and then if you can just look at the bottom, it would and then drag your mouse on the middle, probably around the area, and then something will pop up.
share screen.
A green, yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can see it now.
All right. Okay. I'm so sorry. Okay. So
you can just share it.
the presentation. Is that still showing now?
All showing. Sorry about
Okay, fine. So, all right, I won't go backwards, but I'm hoping that I'm up to this part now. So we're just saying that that IT is helping us with the change in the way that we teach and students learn, and there's a new focus on problem solving. Students need to be able to handle situations, and we're feeling that the way we've traditionally assessed their abilities have been sort of old school and been a very narrowly focused curriculum and assessment in the past. So one of the other, I'm just trying to move that a bit, yeah. So one of the other things that has happened, of course, is that COVID-19 has really accelerated the movement towards hybrid models of teaching and learning and putting our teaching online, and that appears to be helping students find new ways with mini quizzes and being in collaborate, breakout rooms, etc. That has helped them learn in new ways. And of course, IT has been very quick to fill the gap in providing us with some of the software to do this in clever ways. But it's interesting that that in Australia, again, because we monitor student satisfaction, and it's publicly available at the end of every year. Students, graduates give us feedback that there actually was a drop in student satisfaction. I think because some universities made the shift sort of late in the development, but also I think we have to be mindful that some students, or a lot of students, still like the campus experience, and I think that a lot of universities moved very quickly to a completely online environment, and student satisfaction in terms of feeling part of a student body, peer support, and those sorts of in-house and one-on-one interaction went, and because of social distancing and so forth, So we have to be mindful that a hybrid model might be useful to consider when one is redeveloping curriculum to meet your new teaching goals. So just to reiterate some of the things that I was thinking and talking about before around traditional ways of teaching and learning, and there's certainly been in my experience where you're very aware of yourself, where you sit or you stand in a lectern in front of a number of students, and they're supposed to attend. There wasn't recording facilities; they couldn't pick up lecture notes afterwards. So if they weren't there, they often missed out. And there was also some sense that we were the keeper of a lot of knowledge, and that we would offer them those in PowerPoint presentations and use of textbooks, etc. And then the assessment format used to be a student cobbling together these fragments of information from lectures and readings to be able to memorize them in some sort of exam, which usually, as I said, historically used to be at the end of each semester, which was soon lost afterwards because there was no sense of working with the knowledge. It was about reproducing the knowledge without having to apply it. Whereas in terms of authentic assessment, which has been probably around more in European settings than Asian settings in my experience, there's been an early sense of inquiry and dialogue with small group tutorials, which was also very resource intensive. It takes, it was more costly to provide tutorials and opportunities for students to work with in small groups with a tutor or a mentor, but the outcomes in terms of applying knowledge appears to have better outcomes for students. So, so educators have to be prepared to also question and be critical or critically constructive of the information that is being imparted to them, and to try and make sense of it through dialogue and discussion and so forth. So the assessment format in an authentic setting is therefore to rely on a whole range of different assessment types in order to problem solve, to participate and rethink ways of applying knowledge, and maybe just one piece, and also in this point of having one data point of assessment is really old school now. And so you'll see in a lot of curriculums that you've got many data points which build up the formative assessment into a summative assessment at the end. So there's the theory behind authentic assessment is that there's higher level assessments, there's an increase in cognitive processing of the information, and there's more likely to be retention of knowledge and transfer rather than just retaining it for the sake of the exam. So there's a lot of educational theory around learning approaches, and we talk about this one theory is around surface learning and deep learning. And again, surface learning appears to replicate the traditional ways that we used to assess students' capacity. So it's about using lectures, that the student is not involved in the learning as much, and memorising and recalling was how we approached assessment tasks, where it's with deep learning is a two-way model of communication. And it's about making sense of new information and linking it to what we know from our life experience, from what our lecturers share, and from reading. So the trainee is actively involved in the learning, and learning is about helping the trainee or the student to see things differently, that's individual and meaningful to them. So it becomes an individual experience, and where we value their input. And because I worked in social work, or still work in social work, we had, and probably some of you do, might have master's students they've come from a whole variety of backgrounds, and we value that capacity to have a wide range of knowledge bases and pedagogical approaches that can, be useful in applying to new situations in a new discipline or a new curriculum that a student is interfacing with. So group discussions, simulations, demonstrations, practice, modelling, all those sorts of assessments become very useful for this deep learning, which is sustainable and which students take out into the marketplace and hopefully become useful. So this isn't new. Some of this work has been done, particularly, I don't know again what the audience backgrounds are, but if you're teaching in professional courses or health courses like, nursing, but even technical courses like car mechanics, etc., they all apply their knowledge to working on a car, working on a patient, having placement experiences in industry. So they're all very what they would call first order authentic pieces of authentic assessment, because they're really in real life situations. But finding that capacity for students to actually move into industries and into employment fields while they're still students is, again, very costly, very time consuming. And in my profession, in social work, they've got to do 1,000 hours in human welfare settings, and setting up those placements for students is a lot of work, and it's a very crowded field. So it's not for the faint-hearted, but more and more students are wanting to have that real life experience. So if you're doing journalism, they want to work on a newspaper, and then you've got to sort of find ways for students to do that. But getting back to assessment, there's a whole variety of authentic assessment types that probably you use now. Again, this is where IIT can help us with creating the platforms and the software so that students can use these formats in order to complete assessments that replicate real life situations where they have got capacities to apply their knowledge to new new case examples, like case studies, etc. So, for example, there's videos, designing video, developing e-portfolios, journals, blogs, wikis, developing brochures, the sort of things that they will do once they graduate, but they're having to use their knowledge and their theories to be able to apply why they're creating a brochure, for someone who's perhaps intellectually impaired or has who need to have information about a certain thing. Well, what we know about that, what's the knowledge base of that particular field of practice, and how would you find something how would you produce something that's engaging, and it's not just a good idea, but it has to be based on some sort of pedagogy that you've actually engaged with in the curriculum. You might want to reproduce a piece of art. It might be a critique of an article, a presentation, or posters are very common. I imagine you use some of those now. So, but not to suggest that therefore testing knowledge is to go out and not be used. There's always a point where quizzes in a formative way, or needing to know that students actually understand concepts. This is where an exam has its place. So it's not a matter of saying that they're not good, but it's not. We shouldn't be relying on rote learning and retention and memorising for students to feel comfortable that students have the requisite knowledge and skills to be able to do the job that you're training them for. So just to finish this section off, then authentic assessment is about educators creating a better assessment tasks that mimic real life situations, and situations that are innovative and relevant to the work that they'll be doing as graduates. the research is quite strongly in favour of authentic assessment because students become more engaged with the tasks. The feedback is usually very positive, and they show more interest and motivation because they can see what the usefulness is of the work that they're doing, rather than having to just memorise a whole lot of facts that they then soon lose after they've finished that subject. And that there's the suggestion that there's higher level skills and growth of critical thinking and problem solving, which we think in whatever profession or whatever training you're offering is very useful. And one of the key parts of this is that collaboration with others, of sharing ideas and debating ideas and critiquing other people's ideas with their personal knowledge, as well as their theoretical knowledge, is a very useful way of bringing out and developing those abilities. So, students, yes, therefore don't see the assessments as boring and tedious, but actually engage very well with it. Okay, so this section is really talking about how you go about it, and I've been involved in quite a few of curriculum reviews, and again, this is a very tedious but important process, which may take a couple of years to get to the end point. But it's about really changing the way that you visualise and then transform your curriculum to incorporate authentic assessment. But it's also very important to make sure that you're actually working across year levels and across semesters and across subjects, that you're not replicating, doubling up, or making top heavy with certain sorts of assessment that the student does over and over again, because no one talks to one another. And I'm not sure whether that has been your experience at all, but certainly until we started doing this at La Trobe, having a day seminar at the end of every semester to review our subjects, that we realised that a lot of times we were overlapping. We were using the same textbooks, or we were asking to do the same sort of case study over and over again, not maybe changing the type of so that the assessment type was the same, maybe the content was somewhat different, but students then would feedback that they felt that they would, they were engaging in different subjects, the same sort of material. And when there's so much knowledge to learn, why would you want to repeat things that and build knowledge that is not really new? So having to actually talk with colleagues and visualise how the curriculum might look and who's going to step in to do that, and who's the best teacher for this, and what else is important for students to learn, takes quite a long time. But we went through this visualisation process by starting with ideas about what do students, what sort of student graduate do we want? What do they look like? What can they do? What knowledge should they have? And how will they perform? And I'm going to give you an example of a couple of those. And again, because of my background in social work, that's where it's a bit limiting for many of you, but you can get the idea of how some of these, developing curriculum that's transformative may work. But it allows departments and individuals to be able to talk together, to review what they're doing, and whether someone else is doing something similar, or whether there's a gap in the knowledge. And that's what's more important. You sometimes employ somebody because they've got incredible knowledge or skills, or they've come from an important employer group, but is that going to fit into the curriculum? Is it a promotion for somebody, rather than that they've got the best skill set to be able to meet that gap in the curriculum, which really comes really important, that what you need to be doing is creating a mapping what your students need to be able to do a job, and then what sort of teaching do we need to meet that that curriculum, those curriculum needs. So you need to start with the student attributes, as we call them here, and then you create a course learning outcomes. Or if you want a student to be a problem solver, what is it in the course that
just reminding you 5 minutes left.
Okay, then that we need to be able to offer them those, and then you transform them into the next chapter. So I'm just going to, because the last thing is using rubrics, what I was asked to talk about, I'm just going to show you a quick video of a colleague out at La Trobe who used this this type of software to be able to develop a rubric, and basically rubrics are the learning outcomes in an assessment. So let me see if I can start that.
The rubric that I used last year. So the students had to put their group number. First, they had to put their name in, and then they had to give marks for 4 criteria given in this rubric. So they had to give a mark for teamwork, role and collaboration, interpersonal communication skills, contributes individually towards all areas, and then works collaboratively with the team with the editing of final submission. And I just added a comment section for each rubric. They had to download this and fill this for themselves as well as for each team member in their group. So they had to do this 4 times. And once they completed their rubrics, they had to upload it into LMS. It was set up as an LMS assignment, and then from my end I had to download each of these submissions and then collate the marks on a separate Excel sheet, which was an onerous process. And this took me about, for each group assignment, to collate these peer marks, it took me about 6 to 7 hours. And as you can see, we had 108 students last year. This year, we currently have 99 students. And it took quite a long time for me to do this for 3 group assignments. And this year, we transferred this to the SRACE program, which was quite easy to use. And the main thing I had to do was to upload the class list as well as the group numbers. And then for each group assignment, we had to create these columns that helps to aggregate the peer mark. So to see how the rubric was incorporated to the SRACE program, if we click on the edit column section, we can put a name, and then we can add the criteria we want in a way that we want the students to see it. So in this case, we added it as a slider, and the students could just slide the bar so that they can until the mark that they want to give to each other. And likewise, for each criterion, we added these sections on SRACE, and it automatically calculated all the marks that they've given to each other as well as for themselves. And we also added a section where the students could give a comment about what their peers did well in that particular assignment.
All right, so I'm just going to, I can't get back to the end because we're running out of time, but it was just an example of a rubric. So the rubric was using the student, the learning outcomes, like being able to collaborate and work as a team member, very useful skill as a graduate. And so they were using a peer group mark to be able to assess that. And that was just a software that made it very simple for the lecturer to be able to calculate the marks. Oops. So I'm just moving that along. Down. Okay. So I'm just giving you again another slide here, looking at this is just one graduate attribute that we use in social work. And so you just have an attribute, ability to work, to use social work knowledge and interventions to meet the needs of that, sort of like a very you know, what we call a motherhood statement, a very wide statement of what we think would be important for one of our graduates in social work to have. And then in terms of the learning outcomes, we develop, you know, what does that look like? What would the student need to be able to do? They need to have knowledge, they need to have principles and concepts. They need to particularly be able to interface with empowering non-oppressive practice, which is particularly important in social work. They need to be keeping abreast with current social work theories, etc., etc. And then we need to look at the assessment, and there's a whole range of assessment. But if you look at some of these, this was just an example of how we might try to assess what one of these learning outcomes might be. So there was an awareness campaign, and they had to actually develop a pamphlet. And so again, it was applying knowledge and a particular learning outcome to an assignment that would be useful. And the second assignment to meet another one of those learning outcomes was a policy briefing paper. So they had to actually, again, in social work, a lot of them will be ministerial briefings, and because a lot of our social work's work in policy. And so again, I hope you can see that, some of the aspects of that. So I'm just going to move through, into, because I'm running out of time, I'm sorry, academic integrity and assessment security. And I think this is, again, very important because the movement towards hybrid models of teaching and learning has seen a lot of increase in cheating. So we again, if you want a university to have good status and high rankings, that's one of the criteria is how we address cheating, and that we make sure that assessment security is taken seriously by the university, and that the graduate is a person who has signed up for the course and who has completed the tasks. So it's become a very, as I said, a very contentious issue, and more of an issue because you don't necessarily know the students very much if you're doing external programs. So we have to make sure that that they're assessed in this new environment. So academic integrity, again, there's three types that the literature suggests that we have to take cognizance of, and certainly plagiarism is, I would say, in my experience, and maybe you need to hear the panel, etc., is probably 80% of what we probably see, and some of it is just poor referencing rather than active cheating. Collusion is becoming very much more important, particularly again with the pandemic and people working from home, etc. And my understanding of a recent study in the University of Wollongong that students were colluding together to write their essays, together. So the work was shared and not individual work, and that certainly is a breach of academic integrity. And of course, cheating can occur in exams, other students taking the exams of other students, or you contracting somebody to do an exam for you or to write an assignment. And I believe the newer term now is that students actually enroll. You pay someone to actually enroll in a course. So you actually it's a ghost student who takes on your identity and completes the work. So I don't know, again, it'd be very interesting to hear from the panel and people who have joined in about what your university have put in place. In most universities in Australia, you've got an academic officer who is the go-to person if you have suspect somebody of breaching one of those three areas of plagiarism, cheating, or collusion. And and there's a process, and you know, as you enroll in a student, and they have to often do modules, so they're very clear what is expected of them in terms of their rights, but also their responsibilities. So again, the types of breaches can, again, usually it's not intentional, reckless. It's just that they're, you know, short on time. They've skipped probably a few processes, but they're not necessarily going out to cheat, but they certainly were borrowing work from another student, or more likely just from using texts that and not giving attributing the proper citations. So so there's loss of marks, you know, remarking, but in more serious cases, which tends to be about 10% of students who are actually brought forward because of a academic misconduct, it's usually that they can be suspended, excluded, have to get a 0 mark and have to repeat it, or actually have to take time out from the university. So I'm sorry I had to rush through that, but I do have quite a lot else to say, but we might finish there, and then we can work through some of the issues when we talk.
All right, so thank you so much for that wonderful presentation, Dr. Click. I'm seeing a lot of responses coming from our attendees that they are really learning a lot coming from your presentation. Okay, so I've got a lot of amazing students' learning experience. And also as an instructor myself, I value that students need to relate their learning to the real life, real world setting, and that's where authentic assessments can be very useful. Well, okay, so panel discussion is all set. And actually for everybody, we have a very unique, well, okay, hold on for a second. I think, okay, Dr. Helen, you may also stop the share now.
Yes, I'm just stopping that now. Yeah, just exiting the screen. Yeah, so I don't need, so someone can take over now.
Sure. You may also find the stop share, okay, in the lower left.
Yeah, I'm just looking for that. Yep. Stop share. Yep.
Okay, so thank you so much for that. All right, so as mentioned, panel discussion is all set. So actually, we have a very unique and engaging webinar format today, as our respected panelists will be asking questions to our keynote speakers to provide us international perspective regarding the subject matter. Our panelists can also share their insights about the questions presented in the discussion. Okay, so questions from our attendees will be picked shortly after our panel discussion. So definitely you can just input all of your questions in our Q&A panel, and we will respond to that after the panel discussion. Okay, so it's time to know our panelists. Our first panelist today is Dr. Pedrito M. Castillo II. Dr. Castillo is the Vice President of Institute of Pedagogical Advancement and Competitiveness of University of Mindanao, which leads in the implementation of outcome-based education, or OBE, design and development of modules and course syllabus, and performance assessment and evaluation of all academic programs. Welcoming you in our virtual stage, Dr. Castillo. Pleasure to have you here, sir.
Good morning, everyone. And thank you, Dr. Klee, for a very informative presentation. Thank you very much. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, sir. So our second panelist is Dr. Agnes Sequino. Dr. Sequino is currently the Director of Center for Policy Research and Development Studies of University of San Jose Recolectos, Cebu City, a research fellow at Royal Institute of Research in Singapore, and a visiting professor for Business Research Ethics and Sustainability at American University of Sovereign Nations, Arizona, USA. We welcome Dr. Sequino in our webinar. Good morning, ma'am. Okay. All right. I think you're on mute, Dr. Sequino.
Sorry about that. Good morning, everyone, and good morning to the rest of the panelists, and good afternoon to Dr. Klee. And thank you for a very informative sharing.
Okay. All right. Thank you, ma'am. So our third panelist is Dr. Marie Paz Morales. Dr. Morales is the Director of Publication Office of Philippine Normal University and serves as an Editor-in-Chief of two ASEAN Citation Index Philippine journals, the Normal Lights and Journal of Educational and Human Resource Development. Recently, she received the Research Citation Award from PNU. She is also the current chair of National Research Council of the Philippines, Division 1, and the Assistant Corporate Secretary of the Governing Board. We welcome Dr. Morales in our webinar stage. Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning. Good morning, Nina. Good morning to our panelists. And good afternoon, Dr. Helen. Good morning, everyone.
All right. So our last but not the least panelist, of course, is Dr. Elmer Bondoc. Dr. Bondoc is a professor in the School of Nursing and Allied Medical Sciences and is currently the University Research Office Director of Holy Angel University in Pampanga. He is a bona fide member of Sigma Theta Tau International Honor Society in Nursing, Lambda Delta Chapter, a peer reviewer of several reputable journals such as the International Journal of Applied and Advanced Sciences and Journal of Nursing Management. We welcome Dr. Bondoc in our stage. It's a pleasure to have you here, sir.
Good morning, Philippines, and good afternoon, Dr. Helen. We thank you for echoing so much of things that we in the Philippines are currently undergoing. Transformative change in education that is changing from the usual competency-based education to the current outcomes-based education, where authentic assessment is basically at the center, at the hub of everything that we do as educators. Thank you very much.
All right. Okay, so audience, there you have our panelists for today. And again, if you do have any questions to our keynote speaker and panelists, feel free to write them down in our Q&A box. And you might as well add the name of the person you wish to address your question to. Okay, but just to get us all warmed up in the discussion, let me ask first a question, okay, that would really start the engaging topic of this one. Dr. Click highlighted the authentic assessment and its big potential to improve students' learning outcomes. What are your thoughts about authentic assessment? And my question is actually, what are your thoughts about authentic assessment? And do you have any insights in your institution's position for this type of assessment? Okay, so who would want to answer first? Okay, let me ask Dr. Pedrito M. Castillo II. Dr. Castillo?
Yes, good morning. That's a very nice starting question to ask, really. Well, in our university, we are compliant with the Commission on Higher Education's mandate on outcome-based education. And because of that, we put into policy as part of our quality assurance mechanisms, the outcome-based implementation really in our main campus and all the branches of the University of Mindanao. On top of that, we also submit to PTC, the Philippine Technological Council, for our engineering programs, and PCAB for our computing programs. All of these accrediting agencies are using instruments that's OBE based. And when you talked about OB, it's really more on performance and authentic assessment. So what we do is that we marry the authentic assessment part with the knowledge-based assessment tasks, because as we all know, our engineering programs have licensure examinations, and the mode of licensure examination assessment design is really multiple choice. So we cannot do anything about it except to really also still incorporate multiple choice. And what we do is that we ensure that our multiple choice questions are really in a higher order thinking skills level. Now, if you look at Bloom's taxonomy as a lens, and in terms of performance assessment, we really do invest a lot in our performance assessment. We have established our program advisory council to guide us and to continue finding meaning and relevance with our academic program. So we have a program academic advisory council who are represented by the industry and other relevant stakeholders, so that when we design our assessment tasks, particularly the authentic assessment tasks, we are really assessing the right, the most appropriate skills and knowledge and behaviors that students should demonstrate after completing a course and after completing a program.
Oh, wow.
I think,
okay.
yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for that insight, Dr. Castillo, regarding the practice that you have in your university about authentic assessment. So, may I ask this time Miss Agnes Sequino or Dr. Agnes Sequino about that one?
Yeah, thank you, Nins. Yeah, in our university, we also have we use such authentic assessment in dealing with our students. And even before, I just would like to share that in my 29 years of experience as a faculty, even before the implementation of OBE, as mandated by CHED, I was already using authentic assessment in my classes. And the challenge before was that, as I have mentioned earlier, the challenge was that there were actually there was a Turnitin at the time when I started, but then I found it really easy when I was able to use, because we subscribed to Turnitin in starting 2013, so we were able to actually make use of the facility. And one thing that I considered as a challenge before was that when I used, like, I asked my students to come up with video presentations after the lecture, or when I bring my students out to the actual production facility, when I taught production management, I was able to really ask them authentic assessment task, performance task, when after the activity, I asked them to submit essays on their experience, because it's a lot different when students are really brought to the actual situation wherein there was a fuller understanding of what the lecture was all about when they are able to see the actual thing. So doing that, I was able to really experience the full understanding of students when we use such authentic assessment tasks, no, when I gave that to them. So right now, with the implementation of OBE, our faculty are actually doing the same things, no. We are actually making use of such assessment tasks, and we are able to see the difference in the way the students are able to learn, no, in the process. So I believe it's very, very helpful to be able to see what Dr. Click has presented today. We are able to see how the students are able to learn by the assessment tasks that are given to them after the lecture. So the learning process is actually more meaningful. So thank you.
Okay, so thank you so much for that, Dr. Sequino. And what are your thoughts about this one, Dr. Morales?
Thank you, Nina. Good morning once again. My thoughts about the authentic assessment, it's really important because I'm from the Philippine Normal University. We are a teacher education institution. We are actually the National Center for Teacher Education, and this is really very important as a technology transfer to would-be teachers. So it's really, we are emphasizing this one way back 2013. We started with OBE. So we have our Objectech and OBTEC, that's for teacher education curriculum. And my emphasis right now would be on the transition from the pre-pandemic to the pandemic. So we are trying to take a look at how we would be still managing authentic assessment even during the pandemic. We transitioned from the face-to-face to what we call the flexible learning, and we are using the Kaway Aralan sa Bagong Kadawian as a framework for this one, emphasizing feedback system, the rubric assessment, which was mentioned by Dr. Helen a while ago. It's really a very good review for all of us, okay? And on a personal note, I am a physics teacher actually. So I've been teaching physics and research for about 35 years. And I find authentic assessment as really something that would give meaning to what you are teaching, especially to, to students who would be physics teachers later on. And from the feedback that I have been getting from them, those who have been teachers already, they would always be coming back and say, Ma'am Paz, we were able to use all the assessments that you were giving us way back 19 like this and like that. So it really makes a meaningful, it touches the hearts and the minds and the souls of our students as teachers. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, that is a very nice insight, Dr. Morales. It has got something to do with emotional learning as well. Okay, when it comes to authentic assessment. Okay, so how about you, Dr. Bondok? Okay, what can you say about authentic assessment?
I echo all of the commentaries given by my esteemed colleagues in the panel. However, let me emphasize on the following notes. Authentic assessment is one thing that during the time that education has been instituted is already here present with us. So no one can ever claim that authentic assessment is basically something new for us today. However, it is the consciousness of the educators that is quite new as of current. Because let's face it, in the old curriculum, the curricula that we actually had, the ones that we also were trained into when we were still students, like our students today, we primarily focus on something that is more metacognitive rather than something that is capability building. When the OBE curriculum came into the talks in terms of the change of the educational landscape when K-12 transition came into the Philippines, there has been such a huge controversy as to its adoption, primarily because educators are moving away from the usual ways of dealing things in the classroom. That primarily is to teach and later on do the assessment. Which, if we're going to go back to the fundamentals of learning and that of education, assessment should come before teaching, because if assessment comes before teaching, the professor or the teacher becomes very conscious on what are the things that he or she would be emphasizing in the classroom encounter, so that education becomes a reality, that it's transmissible and it's basically building something on our students' end. Thereby, when OBE came into the picture, that became a more apparent consciousness giving onto the level of the educators for them to actually think of something that would authentically measure the translation of formerly we call objectives, now we call outcomes, into actual capabilities. Gone are the days that we are only settling in making our students be ranked accordingly from 1 to 10 based on numerical outputs because of their capabilities in terms of cognitive assimilation. Today, what we are more concerned about is we teach them conceptually, but rather we also look into them the ability of the student to translate what they have learned into something that their hands can do, their hearts can actually feel, and more importantly, their mind can actually dictate. At the end of the day, when we consider authentic assessment, we are gearing away from measuring our students based on the metric of 1 to 100, because what we are trying to measure today would be their aptitude and their ability to perform things as professionals after graduation. We are trying to now mold students not to become prepared mentally, but rather students who are actually prepared to actually take on the responsibility of becoming professionals later on. The second question as to what are the preparations that we do in our local setting, in our university, I would like to echo that we cannot actually proceed further in saying that we are trying to become obedized when we do not have a framework to begin with. Because at the end of the day, evaluation is streamlined based on what we actually have as a framework wherein we actually go back to that. When we talk about framework as echoed by Dr. Click a while back, that primarily goes back into the basic tenet of what we call constructive alignment, because every outcome has to be spelled out into an authentic assessment that primarily targets what we want our students to actually develop. So today, we are very conscious in developing into them what we want them to develop, not basically hit and misses. Number two, when we actually live by the concept of constructive alignment, we are now conscious that every outcome is paired with an assessment that matches. Dr. Casilla mentioned about Bloom's taxonomy a while back, meaning that every verb that we actually use in terms of the outcomes that we declare is an equivalent to that of an assessment that we actually develop. We say we cannot actually perform an assessment that basically would require skills development when our outcome is basically set as to cognitive levels, for example, understanding and that of remembering. last but not the least, for the framework to for the framework to become functional, there must be what we call an evaluation of whether or not this assessment that we are doing are said to be targeting what must be targeted. So at the end of the day, in closing for this question, I would like to amplify the fact that authentic assessment is something that must be prepared for, something that basically would take so much time on the part of the professor or the educator, because we cannot actually do something about assessing a student without us being prepared for it. So it's more of preparing more how to assess, and then later on followed it by preparing what must be taught to our students. Thereby, we actually target what must be given to them. We actually lessen the fact that we're giving them information that are only nice to know, but rather preparing them to what the real world would be after they earn their degrees. Thank you very much.
Okay, that is a very insightful answer, Dr. Bondok. So I actually agree that it would really take a lot of toll to the instructor's end when it comes to working on with authentic assessment. So what can you say about that, Dr. Click?
Yes, I'm just sort of nodding my head because I think what
Yeah.
Dr. Bondok was saying is so important. I think there seems to be full agreement that authentic assessment is the name of the game, and it sounds like they've been implemented in your universities for quite some time, 2014 by the sound of it. I'm not sure, but it must have been some sort of policy shift in your the government sort of decreed. But it comes down to what Dr. Bondok said. It's about resourcing it, because it's much easier to mark an exam with this when you're looking for the same sort of answer, to actually reading and assessing individual pieces that have individual thought, and it's time consuming. And so I am quite interested in hearing about and the other piece that was said too is that you've got to do the curriculum mapping. I think what you call it is constructive alignment, which we just call the curriculum mapping. But you've got to start at that point of aligning your student attributes or graduate attributes or capabilities that you mentioned to the learning outcomes, and then which of the assignments are going to meet which one of those. I didn't have time to show you, but I was going to show you what we mapped year by year, subject by subject, and ticked which one of the learning outcomes would be assessed in each in the box, in a matrix. And they have to every 5 years we get re-accredited, all the programs here. I imagine it's the same over there, particularly for nursing and teaching that was mentioned. So so I can only confirm that what you're saying, but I am interested is whether the resources are following the ability of the universities and you as academics to be able to implement this.
Okay, so there you have it. So thank you so much about that, Dr. Click. And I think it's about time for our panelists to ask questions. So I want to open the floor, okay, for that questioning, okay, to Dr. Morales.
Hello once again. Good morning and good afternoon, Dr. Helen. Actually, my question is all about technology integration and authentic assessment, especially so that authentic assessment is done usually in groups. And my question would be, how would we ensure inclusivity, or how would we address class heterogeneity and diversity while we are doing or implementing authentic assessment?
Can you just say that again, what you're asking?
Most authentic assessments are done in group. It's because of the fact that we wanted to address a lot of burden that we have as teachers, checking and giving feedback. So we do them in groups, so that in a class we would only give feedback to 5 groups at the most. Okay, the question would be, if these are done in groups, how would we as teachers ensure inclusivity or address class or group heterogeneity and diversity?
Yes, I think that's a very good question in relation to that we all embrace collaboration. We think that group activities are very important, and we do have to. I think what authentic assessment is saying, that we actually want to bring in individual differences, diversity, whether it's gender or sexuality, or living remotely or in urban areas, and people's age, etc. So I think it's how you build that into, like that rubric that I was showing you, the video. They were some of the, if you were wanting to ensure that students embrace that as well, then that could be one of your learning outcomes that students would have to address, is how they collaborated to address a diversity, or that included, that they were inclusive of different people's point of view in a team assignment. I think while we're on that subject, I didn't have time to push through, but in terms of the assessment integrity of and the security, it's often hard in groups to see who does the work. And I think a lot of my students used to groan when there was group activities, because they found that there was the leaders, there was the followers, there was the one who never did the work, and how do you ensure for students that they were getting a fair mark. And I found, particularly in the health faculty, that a lot of students with particular types of health backgrounds, like disciplines, would take the lead and just want to do the assignment and take over, because they were wanting to get honours and they wanted to move on and get a good mark. So they wouldn't allow other students to contribute very much, or would do the work for them just so that they wanted to get the mark. So again, it wasn't allowing for diversity. So, but in your rubric, if students assessed each other on their ability to be able to contribute meaningfully, for example, that would be one way that you could ensure that diversity and inclusion was part of how you assessed them. It wasn't just on being able to do a good assignment and get a good mark, but really, did you take in the views of other, were you inclusive of the other views of other students, for example, as being one of the criteria in the rubric. And as you could see from that video, she was able to get students to mark, each other for each class member. But it really is quite contentious.
Thank you very much, Dr. Helen.
Thank you so much, Dr. Helen Cleek. How about you, Dr. Casillo? What do you think about that question of Dr. Morales about ensuring inclusivity and address class heterogeneity and diversity? Let's say technology integration or authentic assessment.
Actually, that's a very good point, because it's a United Nations mandate, actually, under Sustainable Development Goals, inclusivity and taking into consideration the diversity of our students. What we can do, which is not generally practiced in the Philippines, is offer a menu or a foray of alternative assessment tasks. Admittedly, that's not being done in the Philippines in general. I don't know with my colleagues here if they're practicing it. What we can do is that we cannot just offer one single authentic assessment task. Instead, we can offer a menu of alternative assessment tasks. So those students who do not like to write an essay can have an option what assessment task now they can do, so that still without sacrificing the integrity of the learning outcome or the learning competency. So series of assessment tasks or menu of assessment tasks still aligned, constructively aligned with the learning outcome. And admittedly, that's really very tiresome, and it really takes a lot of time and work on the part of the teacher. However, if we can digitize that, if we can put that into a software on the university's part, then I think that's very doable. In our university, modesty aside, we have developed our own OBE software. So the performance of our students and the program in itself against the CHED PSG, the program standards and guidelines, program outcomes of each academic program, we digitally analyze it. So we have developed, modesty aside, my office has spearheaded the development of the software. We call it the OATH, Outcomes Assessment Threshold. That is really to expedite and universalize the performance of students against the program outcomes enumerated by the CHED PSG. So that is really one very practical thing to do. But I think the university or the college should really improve and enhance their IT infrastructure invest really so much on IT, because that's really the trend of the day. And Ched has already said that even if we will go back to face, we are still going to do the flexible learning delivery mode. So I think we cannot really do anything about it except to really embrace it as part of our daily routine as teachers and school administrators. And for those who are not techie, baby boomers, I think we really need to evolve as well. No? So this is all in response to the diversity of our students. No, this is not really for us. And learning is a never-ending process, is an old cliche. So we also need to really evolve as a teacher as well, and as a university.
Okay, thank you so much about. Thank you, Dr. Castillo. So, what do you think about that, Dr. Bondoc? What are your insights when it comes to that kind of inclusivity, when it comes to the classroom, or even the authentic assessment?
Let's have to face it that even before the curriculum became OBE or OBDICE, as we like normally call it, there is already the concept of like student diversity in the classroom, and that's something that we cannot actually avoid. Let's like look into this. I would echo, of course, the commentary given by my esteemed colleagues here. It's really true that authentic assessment has to actually come in a wide variety of options that always targets the outcomes based on the alignment of the outcomes and that of the assessment measures. However, we have to like look into the perspective that at the time that we are not concerned about the concept of like alignment in terms of like assessment measures, our assessment techniques are still one shot addressing all. Thereby, when we like look into the concept of what is said to be the changes of today, that's primarily the challenge, is how does the instructor or the educator becomes innovative and creative enough in developing outrightly the appropriate measures for the students. If we remove the concept of technological enhancement, that would still go back to the very basic tenet of what education is. You give out what is intended for the students to actually be assessed with. We cannot actually give them any platform for measurement of their capabilities if we are not prepared, if we did not prepare them for that. And thereby, if that would be the case, it is the creativity of the instructor or the professor that comes in that would target the diversity of the students inside the classroom. Removing the element of technology, it is basically how we prepare our students to actually match up with our expectations as to the assessment techniques that we're trying to like give them out. Because if we're going to like look into the concept of diversity all the time, there will never be one assessment measure that would actually cater all of them, because there is diversity all the time. And diversity is not something that we can challenge all the time, but we can actually embrace. What we can do is, in the absence of the menu or the options of the probable assessment techniques, that there will be what we call the students are choosing from, we can develop something that is authentic enough that the students can actually become confident in dealing with it, regardless of their diversity or their diverse cultural perspective. At the end of the day, if there would what we call outcomes measurement because of the authentic assessment, we cannot provide 5 assessment measures only for one outcome, because that will be burdensome on the part of course, of the professor, and at the same time will be more confusing on the end of the students. Take, for example, if we profile our students and we know for a fact that most students are more using, for example, a learning style that is more cognitive, a handful are doing skillful activities, for example, psychomotor activities. If we provide them one activity for the group that has more cognitive aptitude, more likely an activity for those who are actually skillfully adept, we are not going to develop our students holistically. And thereby, that being said, there will be a disconnect in terms of our role as teachers, because we are actually like right-sizing them based on what they can do, and we do not actually provide them any more opportunities for them to be challenged to learn something greater than what they can actually like develop. And more importantly, in the concept of authentic assessment, we are not only concerned about developing into them what we call translatable capabilities based on cognitive aptitude development, but rather we also are teaching them life lessons that they can actually make use of when they become professionals. Take, for instance, when you are already working and you are confronted with things that you are not adept with, if we train them to actually like become more active and involved on things that they are basically comfortable with, when they come into the real life situations, they could not actually like adjust because they are confined in their comfort zones. And thereby, we have to like practice the concept of inclusivity and diversity when we actually like prepare assessment techniques. Because at the end of the day, it is the proper development and execution of the authentic measurement that matters a lot. And it goes back again, so I would like to reiterate, on the creativity of the professor in developing one, because there would be what we call innovations that must be incorporated as well when we actually prepare all of this for our students. At the end of the day, we are all about students. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so at the end of the day, it's all about our students, okay, learning. So,
Yeah.
okay, thank you so much, Dr. Bondok. And okay, so Dr. Sikino is actually in here, though I think, okay, it's about time for us to have a short break. Okay, and then we'll just get back and okay, we'll continue the discussion. All right, so back to you, Jojo. Thank you so much, panelists. And
Yes, thank you, panelists and Dr. Cleek, for sharing your holistic approach and authentic assessments. I'm pretty sure that was very motivational and insightful for a lot of our attendees. All right, we are going to have a break for a couple of minutes. Q&A will follow shortly. So please place in your questions in the separate Q&A box. Just a reminder, please place it in the Q&A box. Thank you. Okay, we're back and we're on to the question and answers. Please drop in your questions on the question and answer box, and I'll pass it on to Nina.
all right, so thank you so much for that, Jojo. And yes, we're back. Okay, so it's time for the questions coming from our audience. But then again, okay, we actually missed some few questions coming from our panelists. So we will just ask Dr. Castillo to ask question first to Dr. Cleek, and then we'll have Miss Agnes or Dr. Agnes for that afterwards. Sorry. Okay, go ahead, Dr. Castillo.
Okay, we're back. Dr. Cleek, I just would like to really know the best practices that you do in your university in Latrobe about academic integrity. Because right now in the Philippines, because of our sudden shift to blended online and other flexible learning delivery modes, I think we are really finding it difficult to deal with cheating and plagiarism. Of course, that's why we subscribe to Turnitin, by the way, because that's the first level, no, that we can safeguard the integrity of the task or the work of our students. But can you add further to that based on the Trobe's practice?
Sure, thank you for that question. In the slides, I did indicate what sort of the official sort of policy is and how they have a special person who is the integrity officer, which makes our life easier because she sort of standardizes, or he standardizes our approach. And so once we detect or suspect something, then there's a process of providing an opportunity for the student to tell their side of the story. We sort of alert them that we've got a concern, we withhold their mark, and then I go to the integrity officer and she calls a meeting, and then they can bring a support person, and so it's sort of like a gentle start to offering them an opportunity to say what it was for them that ended up in them having a plagiarism or a collusion issue, and that seems to work quite well. As I said, 80% of them are just unintended, but probably reckless, but not malicious, and so that, and there's grades. They usually, if this is your first this is your first warning, then they usually take marks off, or they make you redo it. But there are software too that the integrity officer can look at, and they can go back. They ask for the USB that maybe where the assessment came from, if it was a sense that what I find was often that there were a piece of writing or parts of the essay would be very fluent and very well written, and then other parts were very poorly written, and it appeared like it was two people. So by going back into the actual assessment, getting them to bring in the development of their thoughts, etc., is very quite useful, because they can get behind this and look at the dates and so forth. We're finding that, just as an example, that using Google Docs, which I obviously didn't do very well today on. Because often the collaboration is in small groups, and if they work on Google Docs, you can see the provenance of where their thoughts were happening and the development of their essays if they're doing an assignment together. And that's another way that you can sort of authenticate if they're doing the work. But we're finding that you really need a process. And as I think I mentioned in the presentation, that we also get them to complete modules at the start of their academic journey, and might be refreshers. They get them to redo it, and so that they're in no doubt what the process is, what the principles are, and their responsibilities. And so I think that's a good starting point, because them saying I didn't understand or I didn't know, I had to do it this way, therefore is not an argument. So you can actually start with the fact that you understand that this is your responsibility, and this is an example of that. And I'll be interested in what because again, that's resources, isn't it? It's very hard to and when you don't really know the student, and that's why I find what we call triangulate the type of assessment, and I think a small exam, when they actually have to be invigilated, is, to me, was the only foolproof way that I could know that that person in front of me was actually taking the test, and they had their student card in front of them, and then that was worth maybe 30 or 40% of the mark. And although it was like we're saying, it's old school giving them to do, but when you want to actually test their knowledge of concepts, then an exam, and then the rest of the assignments could be of different sorts. But if they did very poorly on the exam and then very well on the assessment, when they would take home exams or some sort of other assignment, then you would say, well, there just be a discrepancy between that type of understanding concepts and the fact that somehow you didn't know it, you had a very poor mark for your exam, but then when you applied it to this essay, you seem to have excelled. How can that be? So that's another way of trying to triangulate the learning.
That's very informative. Thank you, Helen.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Click. So how about you, Dr. Sakina? What's your take on that? Like, what is your opinion when it comes to like your best practices in your institution when it comes to academic integrity or upholding academic integrity?
Right now, we are actually, we have subscribed to Turnitin already, so it has helped us a lot. However, we are actually having problems in, I just would like to ask also Dr. Click on how authentic assessment can be used in laboratory classes, especially in our School of Computer Studies and in the School of Engineering, because there were actually cases wherein, of course, we can check on students' outputs if they submit essays or they submit, but in lab classes, I think it's difficult to integrate such. Do you have practices in your university, or maybe from the other panelists, to help us with such challenges?
Yes, I think the other panelists might have better ideas. But you're talking about laboratory. Did you say laboratory?
Yeah, laboratory classes.
And yes. I mean, I think that's a typical example where your capabilities, if that's a learning outcome, that they have to be able to test something or to be able to perform or demonstrate something. I mean, if that's a skill they've got to use in their practice, then it's an example of authentic assessment as far as I can see. It's very useful, but as long as it's built into your curriculum as being a learning outcome for the student, to be able to demonstrate that, I'd be interested in what other people think.
Well, thank you, Dr. Click. How about the others? Maybe they can also share with us their practices on such cases.
Wonderful question. Okay, Dr. Sakina. Okay, yes, Dr. Morales.
Oh, yes, ma'am. For the laboratory, although right now I'm not teaching any courses with laboratory, I'm teaching research courses. But then what we do in the laboratory based on the project that we are having right now is we ask our students to purchase very or gather materials that are available at home. But I can only share what we have from the sciences. I'm from the physics department.
Mm,
So let's say, for example, circuit boards, we ask them to buy for a minimal fee the boards, and then we give them worksheets, and then they follow what are in the worksheets. But then while they are following, we ask them to do the video. So we ask them to take a video of of themselves while doing the tasks. Of
okay.
course, in the worksheet, we have to include all precautionary measures like you don't need to place the soldering rod on this side and on this side. So some safety measures. We can
Mhm.
even send videos for the safety measures if we want. And then the final product would be the final video presentation on how they were able to gain concept on what they have done. So it's just like instead of the usual written report that we have, before the pandemic, it's a video report. So they have to narrate what they did through the
Mhm.
video. They show the videos, short clips
Mhm.
while they were doing the experiment and the final product and the materials that they did and some of their insights and some of the questions. That's it. So that's how we do it right now. But our rubric has also changed because of that. Instead of
Yeah.
integrating one, following the procedure, number two would be collaborating with students, and number four would be submission of the reports. Instead of those, we changed those to clips, insights, and precautionary measures if they had followed this, and the video presentation as well. I think that would be all, ma'am. I don't know how to relate this to your programs in computer. Maybe you can do ask your students to do screen sharing or screen record while they are doing
Yeah.
the programming. Okay, that's it. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Dr. Morales.
Helps.
Dr. Morales. Okay, so do you have any insights on that or any inputs on that, Dr. Castillo? Dr. Peds?
We lost the puppets.
Hello, I
Okay,
think
there
the
you go.
connection was unstable. What's the question again? Sorry.
So the question of Dr. Siquito is your best practice, okay, in working on with authentic assessment when it comes to those specific subjects such as laboratory works. Is that right, Dr. Siquito?
Oh,
Okay.
oh yes. Yeah, I think we echo the practice of Philippine National University. And on top of that, we subscribe to different softwares available for engineering and computing programs. Unfortunately, it's very expensive. That's
Right.
why we also collaborated with the other schools here in Davao region because I am from Davao City. So we collaborated with the schools from Davao region. We have an organization here in Davao. We call it the Davao Association of Colleges and Universities. So we have collaborated with other schools to really subscribe to a software for engineering and for computing, just to be able to seamlessly transition from face-to-face to blended online. So yeah, so that will really take a logistical nightmare on the part of
Right.
the school, no? But for now, that's what we are doing.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Castillo. What about you, Dr. Bondok? What's your insight about that?
It's quite difficult to actually process because from among the members of the panel, I think I'm the only one coming from the health sciences because I'm a nurse by profession. Thereby, if you're asking for example, if you're asking for my thoughts about how do we do the assessment on things that basically are quite difficult to do because most likely ours would be not only a laboratory setting, but rather is actually a real life laboratory.
Laboratory.
I would like to share with
Yep.
you what I normally do in my class. I handle one undergraduate class, and the concept that I'm handling actually is preparing the students to become adept and skillful in handling cases of patients that are classified as high acuity. When we say high acuity, these are individuals with multi-organ problems as we receive them in the emergency department. We know for a fact that based on IATF ruling, we cannot actually allow our students to go on board because of the threat of the infection looming around. So what I did was, as I've like to connect my rhetoric with, as of the moment with my last one, it's basically creativity coming on our end as educators. We have what we call an activity. We have what we call a protocol in the hospital called clinical pathway. A clinical pathway dictates by standards what must be done when a person comes in the unit, and thereby giving us a prompt that this would be the best thing to do. It's basically an algorithm. So when you like do something, you actually assess on something to actually know what's going to happen next and thereafterwards consequently. So normally when we did the usual form of like teaching before the now normal, we normally expose our students in the clinical area, and that for a fact is basically an authentic formal assessment because they do it real life. They are already on board. But because of the current limitation, what did we do? Um, Apart from like gathering videos of actual real life scenarios from YouTube, we developed our own. Because in the context of the philosophy of constructivism and constructionism, we actually like have to prepare our students a video simulating an authentic situation for them to be able to actually react on it in an authentic manner, thereby allowing them to actually have what we call an onboard processing of the things that they need to do while everything is simulated in a form of a controlled laboratory setting. And when they actually view those videos that we have created, we made sure that all of those videos are equipped with activities or actions done by nurses in the actual setting that are said to be incorrect and erroneous, so that we allow our students to actually process information that when these things happen, they can actually prepare an action plan that would enable them to troubleshoot. That being said, we might actually understand that in the context of what we call lower order thinking skills, because that's basically something that they only judge based on what they see. However, in the context of the framework of the psychomotor domain of learning, rather, there are four phases by which one can fully do something as capable as that of an independent demonstrable activity. And that primarily is done through the concept of imitation and copying. And thereby, when we actually allow our students to view themselves in terms of the video they're actually seeing, and then place themselves in the shoes of those people acting on the video that they find very erroneous, then they can actually reflect on what basically would be done better, so that they can actually like address the problems of the patients, if it is basically multiple by nature, correctly and accurately, thus saving their lives. At the end of that particular encounter, where I, as their teacher, becomes a facilitator, I would ask them to create a pathway on how to best address the situation, of course they'll be defending a week after or basically days later. And you will be surprised that they can actually capture the things that they will be doing if and when they have the possibility of them being on board to actually live in the presence of an actual patient, given that particular situation. In the context of learning, given that particular situation, we actually like enable our students to actually have the processing in the mind that they can actually think outside of the box. Because remember, if everything is done procedurally, this basically is lower order. When you say procedurally, these are things that they would do step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5. But if you inject in between an alteration on these processes that they know as standards, then learning and authentic learning comes in. And when authentic learning comes in, it's tantamount to say that authentic assessment begins, because that authenticity and genuineness that transpires whenever they find out something that they need to correct in a situation that led into the demise of a particular patient in a simulated form of like learning, then we are capable of like giving them that judgment that they are capable later on. the context and the concept of allowing our students to create pathways as early as now that they are confined in a controlled laboratory setting is enabling them to actually have a mind map, to actually like go back into when they are out in the field, that they actually have this in mind already and stored in their memory banks, so that when they go out in the clinical area, they can actually have what we call a quick access from what they have learned before. If I may share with you an experience, during my time as a student, I was in that curriculum where my first encounter of patient with a multiple problem was in the clinical area, and I was dumbfounded. I was so surprised. I wasn't capable of like thinking correctly because I wasn't able to actually like process things outrightly. I know for a fact that I've passed my fundamentals. I know how to assess. I know my basic nursing intervention skills to be applied for a particular situation, but I literally froze because
Mm.
I wasn't prepared for it that much. And
Mhm.
thereby reflecting in the whole process of us being stricken by the pandemic and the educational sector thriving in the new normal, I've come to realize that this forms of like teaching that basically cuts across the concept also of assessment at the same time is enriching on the part not only for the students but also on the part of the educator, because outright we have to say that all of the educators today are challenged to actually abandon usual ways of like dealing with students into a more innovative and creative way of like transforming their manner by which they teach into something that is as close as possible to the reality because of the limitation of the movements that we do. And that in itself is not only like making our students become authentic learners, we ourselves on board in this platform of learning are also what we call wounded soldiers because we're also learning in the process. In the context of us being able to shake our own perspective on like how to deal with things, it also changed because of the pandemic. And because we are experiencing it authentically, I am very certain that we're also translating this on the end of our students because they actually feel also what we are actually currently experiencing. And lahat tayo dito, I would have to say that we all have this aha moments. Let's face it, at the time that we were like doing the things in the new normal, we are the ones actually like crippling the capabilities of the students. But in a thoughtful reflection on the thoughtful reflection later on, we have come to realize that the things that we say that students cannot actually perform, this and that because of the limitations, is basically a in the language of Sigmund Freud and Anna Freud, a projection of telling them that they cannot do it. But apparently, I would like to say that if this basically hits hard on you, let it be a reflection. That basically we say that they cannot do it. It's primarily one thing that we say that we as educators are not prepared to do it also. And
Right.
thereby, if at the end of the day we feel as though that they are still not capable of doing it, we have to reassess ourselves. Are we still capable of becoming educators of today because of these limitations? And that in itself is one also good thing for us to like reflect on as educators, because sabi nga po, as mentioned by Dr. Sikino and Dr. Casilla a while back, even if we transcend into limited face-to-face by next year, even if we move forward in the context where education institutions becomes 100% in full capacity function, we will never abandon the concept of like distance learning, and it's bound to stay. And if it is bound to stay, it is but high time for us to actually like go back to the basic tenets of how it is to actually teach. And that in itself is something that we have to like embrace. I would like to repeat, no, sabi nga po, as I've said a while back, I am a nurse by profession, but I've been in the academy for 16 years. And learning things as an educator today made me see things better and made me see that education is really something that that would flourish and would still develop in the years to come because of the innovativeness that all of the educators who are thriving today in the new normal are carrying on for, of course, the benefit of our students. Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Bondok, for that is really very informative, and thank you so much about that. Okay, so I think it's
Thank
about
you.
time. Okay, I think it's about time for us to answer some questions coming from our attendees. Okay, let me just read one specific question coming from Sir Brando Empado. How can we adapt the authentic learning if the school always required us to create traditional approach of assessment such as periodical exam? Okay, and I could actually ask that question to our keynote speaker, Dr. Helen Clee.
I think that's the hard one, and but my understanding is that in the Philippines, for example, that you've got policies that are saying that you know, you need to use different metrics, which includes authentic assessment and a capacity to meet students' you know, capabilities and so forth. Is that correct? I think it has to be at that level, doesn't it? It has to be at the policy level, and like in Australia, as I say, all our student outcomes are public, in the public domain. So every year, students give feedback on what university they went to, what course they did, and what they thought of the learning and the teaching, and that becomes the metric. And if the students give feedback that that university is not providing them with real life, you know, practice experiences and opportunities to engage with what they're going to do as graduates, well, surely that feedback would not be good for the university. But if you haven't got those mechanisms in place, that would make it hard.
Okay. All right. So thank you so much, Dr. Click. Anyone who can also add some insights regarding that for that question? Anyone from the panelists? Okay, Dr. Morales.
Thank you, Nina. On a personal note, or from my experience, of course, teachers also have their licensure examination, and we usually have that as multiple choice. But what we do in our classes, or specifically on my class or in my class, I do two-tier exams. So when we say two-tier exam, the first part would be the multiple choice. So they choose among the 4 to 5 choices. But then the second part would be a choice of the explanation to their first choice or to their choice on the first set. So this means that I will be able to take a look at the cognitive ability or the cognitive processing of the student, why he or she has chosen that particular choice in the first set. So that's one. The second one would be focusing on the higher order thinking skills, as what Dr. Castillo has mentioned a while ago. So I try to convert the performances, their performances or outputs in the laboratory into multiple choice questions. So that's it. That's from my experience. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Morales. And what about you, Dr. Castillo? What do you think, or what's your take on this?
I think that's one of the many problems that our educational system is facing, really, because a lot of schools, whether public or private, are still enslaved with the traditional assessment task. But for the record, the traditional assessment tasks are not really bad at all. But my professional judgment would be it would only be okay if it is part of the formative assessment tasks. Personally, I would not go for a summative assessment task, the multiple choice questions, because learning outcomes, no? If we go back to the definition of learning outcomes or learning competencies, these are knowledge, skills, and behaviors. And if it is a traditional assessment task, that's only knowledge-based. That's only knowledge-based.
Right.
And if we look at the principles of assessment, we have to look at validity, reliability, educational cost or cost efficiency, educational effect, no, and acceptance. So we live by the standards. And at the end of the day, standards are non-negotiable. If the students cannot demonstrate the standard or the learning competency, then therefore the student should not be allowed to not be promoted. Not failed, really, because that's a very painful term to use. Should not be promoted. Okay, because in hardcore OBE, you cannot deadline learning, by the way, no? And that makes it very debatable. You cannot deadline learning. You need to wait for students to really allow them opportunities, expanded opportunities to demonstrate the learning competency. However, we cannot do anything about the deadlines set by the CHED, set by the Department of Education. I think the ones asking the question is from the basic education, not really from the higher education. And in the principle of management, you cannot manage something that you cannot quantify. That's why the multiple choice is still really something to really look into because it's governed by numbers and all. But however, while our majority of our policies are into numbers, there's no data analytics, no? Like what Helen has mentioned in her talk, no? Or big data analytics, no? That's what we are doing right now as well in our university, no? We are doing big data analytics right now. While majority of the schools are still into traditional assessments like multiple choice tests, there's no published document about how these students perform in terms of a particular learning competency. Example, apply the rules of grammar in an oral discourse. So you cannot find any data, correct me if I'm wrong, in the Philippines that says this school is very rules of grammar in an oral discourse or a written discourse. There's no such thing about it. No. So there's no learning competency database that we can find. As long as you're doing well with the national achievement test, sorry, then your school is okay. No, from a basic education perspective, by the way, no, because they're governed by the national achievement test. So that's it. No, that's why it's very hard. And you cannot also blame the schools, by the way, to still use the traditional assessment as a summative assessment, because that's what they're asking, no? And some accreditation agencies are still asking for it, the traditional assessment task. So we cannot do anything about it, no? That's why I like the idea of our friends from the Philippine National University, you know, to find a balance between the traditional assessment and then the performance assessment or authentic assessment. And unless the licensure examination will really change, then probably the design of the assessment task will really change in the licensure examination. Then probably we can really fully implement performance assessment. That's my take. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Castillo. Any takes on that matter? Dr. Bondo or Dr. Sekino?
Yeah, I would like to agree with Dr. Castillo when he said that if PRC or the Regulations Commission would have to change, then we really have to also, because we have shifted already, you know, the universities, the academe had already shifted. So I think we also need to shift into authentic assessment, or the design of the exams should also change, because as I have experienced before in my classes, I used to teach management classes in the undergraduate program, and I realized that it's a lot difficult to just rely on multiple choice, or we cannot really assess thoroughly, no, like how or what their take would be on things, no, on what we have taught. So it's really something that we have to adapt right now, because we have shifted already in terms of how we teach, how we deliver, how we provide instruction. So there are things that should be done together. I think that's my thing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Doc. Thank you so much, Dr. Sekino. Dr. Bondo?
I echo the retort given to us by Dr. Castillo. I would have to agree that we cannot abandon traditional ways of like performing assessment. In the framework of OBE, there must be what we call a very low percentage as to that particular content. Like we cannot move into the concept of like them doing higher order if they did not pass through the lower order thinking skills. But in a scale of 100%, it is an institution that will set whether or not we employ 20%, 30% of the assessment measures be cognitively given. Number two, we cannot argue with the PSGs that the board exams are meant to stay. Okay.
Right.
At the early outset of the discussions about OBE, the OBE curriculum, moving from competency-based to outcomes-based education, that basically is also my concern. In one of our sessions with, of course, our technical panel, I have raised that question. will the board exam or licensure examination, we have here, Dr. Helen, a licensure examination for most professionals that primarily skilled in the context of them applying what they actually know in a form of a multiple choice question. Historically, literatures would tell us that higher education institutions are preparing the students to take the board exams because from first year to fourth year, examinations, either formative or summative, are all given in a form of an MCQ format. Thereby, at the end of the whole journey, when they take the board exams, what they actually learned is the mastery and the skill of test taking. And we cannot always have a guarantee that they actually develop the concept of like cognitive aptitude development. Secondarily, with that being said, we cannot always argue that when they develop that particular concept of learning, that they pass the board exams, they pass the summative exams, they pass the formative examinations, they get a score of 97 and above, that they are actually adept and capable. Okay. Number 3, because we cannot argue with the PSGs and the examinations, our licensure examinations are basically formatted the same way, we cannot actually revert back to the usual as private educational institutions or rather higher education institutions, because we have to prepare both our students in the real world by preparing them also to get a license to practice in the real world. So what do we do? This basically has been part of most of my sessions with my colleagues and friends in the academy, that we have to remember that the Bloom's taxonomy of learning is basically a step level approach. That when you go up to the higher order thinking skills or aptitude of students, it's inevitable that they pass the lower order. And therefore, we cannot argue that when a student realizes higher potentials, that the students are not capable of remembering and understanding, because it's already subsumed in the step level approach given to us by Biggs, that when a student is capable of performing higher order thinking tasks, they're capable of executing also lower thinking activities, or what we call assessment activities. Thereby, we say that if we are preparing our students in a higher level, that basically is a professional world, and what bridges them from the academe to that higher level is in between the licensure. If we basically allow them to actually become higher order thinkers rather than lower order thinkers, they can actually surpass even the minimum requirements or the standards of the licensure. So we cannot always argue that our curriculum today does not prepare our students for the board examinations. What we can actually argue would be like this: the current setup of giving them performance task activities does not prepare them to develop the skill and the capability to do test taking. That we have to reflect again. What do we want our students to actually be later on? Prepared professionals taking on real life activities and responsibilities, or the ones that only prepares them to take the standard examination? Because if that primarily is your what do you call this, your hard-pressed reality, then we are always going to question the current system. We would always complain that the PSGs are said to be not responsive to the current curriculum. But if we actually transcend from beyond, looking into the benefits constructively of the current setting and the current curriculum, we do not only prepare our students to become licensed professionals, we prepare them with the ability to perform independently by virtue of a license their tasks and responsibilities appropriate for them when they actually become licensed and passers of the licensure examination. So I have actually given the same perspective to two of our colleagues who actually raised their questions via the Q&A chat box, that we cannot argue that when students develop higher order capabilities, that they cannot actually remember and understand concepts. Because always remember this: an engineer cannot build a building without knowing the basics of calculations. They cannot actually like design a good facade or a structure if you're an architect if you did not learn the basics of like design development. We cannot perform life-saving interventions if we did not learn the basic concepts of how do we actually do CPR. And that in itself is something that we have to like remember. I would like to go back on my reiterated points today. It is our creativity that would ensure that our students are prepared two ways. One, in the real life situation when they become professionals, and of course, the ticket for them to become independent practitioners, and that basically is licensure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Bondoc, for that wonderful or valuable information. So, okay, last question that we will be actually we're over time, but I will be asking the last question to our keynote speaker, Dr. Helen. So, coming from Miss Pauline Bato, how do you keep your assessment current, engaging? A challenge is to create assessments that are authentic and fun or engaging.
Well, again, just from my experience in social work, because we interface with our community of employers very heavily, because like nursing and teaching, they have placements and have to go out into a supervised environment, that we get feedback from our employers. We have advisory bodies that feed into our curriculum, and they keep us very relevant. I don't know if engaging is the right word, but they're definitely relevant, because they're like child protection, for instance. They're obviously, they need students who can do very good psychosocial assessments, that can engage with children, who are able to offer a constructive interview. They would be the learning outcomes, but they would be fed into us by our employers and the people who supervise our students. So by keeping engaged with the community, whether it's your engineering community or nursing community, teaching community, I'd be interested if our accreditation requires us to have an advisory body that's made up of people from the community who are, experienced practitioners. And I think that's a very useful way to make sure that our authentic assessments reflect real world situations and practices.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Dr. Klee. Okay, so well, we're just about out of time. Okay, and thank you so much for our outstanding keynote speaker, Dr. Helen Kleek, as well as our amazing panelists. But I would like to request for a very short or brief final thoughts about the subject matter that we're discussing. Okay, so of course, okay, let's start with our keynote speaker, Dr. Helen Kleek.
It's been very informative, as with anything, and I think people have said this, we learn as much as we teach, and I learned a lot about your practices in the Philippines, and the pity we didn't get to hear more of the questions from the audience, because they were going to, again, reflect their own backgrounds and so forth. So I think it's been very useful, but I think it's about, like with anything, it's about our policies. Everything's driven by educational policies, and it's all very well, that the universities have various, they, can construct their own pedagogy around their learning, but if we haven't got strategies and policies that frame our higher education programs, and I don't want to use dictate, but which require us to follow recent practices and to develop things like authentic assessments and so for the higher order learning, then I think the resources will dictate how universities are going to engage with the new ways of assessment.
Okay, so thank you so much, Dr. Kleek. Okay, so again, a virtual applause for our keynote speaker, Dr. Helen Kleek. Okay, now it's time for Dr. Pedrito Castillo to share his final thoughts.
Teachers matter, and it is proven by research evidence. More than ever in this very challenging time, we need expert teachers. Just like what Dr. Elmer has said, the creativity of teachers, that's really expertise. And we need to separate us from those pretending to be teachers. Right now, we need expert teachers who can really be very creative in their design of authentic assessment tasks and even traditional assessment tasks. That's the essence really of this very challenging time. Also, teach by evidence, not just by pure advocacy. Maybe your teaching strategies that you're still employing right now are no longer are obsolete already. So please try to evolve as well. Keep reading and keep attending webinars like this. And of
Yeah.
course, partner with Turnitin. That's the most important thing. In your educational needs, Turnitin can be an answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pedrito. Okay, so yeah, we learn as much as we teach. Okay, so it's your turn, Dr. Marie Paz Morales.
Hello, good afternoon. It's afternoon in the Philippines. So
Afternoon.
from this discussion, one insight that I could get is that we really have to do a lot, especially in our country. One would be our main task is for student improvement and student learning. That's basically what we intend to do, because from our discussions, that's what our goal is. And probably we can reach that through two pathways. One would be take a look at the teachers. So we attempt for teacher quality, and maybe we can have other professional learning development programs for teachers, for them to be able to, for us to be able to become reflective teachers. Maybe we can take or do some action research, and Turnitin would be very effective for this also. So we can do action research that would improve our teaching a lot. And another way would be to engage in research so that we can give a lot of evidence for policy development or improvement of policy. So we can do that in two pathways. One would be to train our teachers to be reflective practitioners, and the other one would be to do policy research. Okay, so educational policy research. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Morales. And now it's Dr. Agnes Aquino's turn for the final thoughts, ma'am.
Yes, and for me, as educators, in order for us to be relevant, we have to continue learning. We have to be open to benchmark what other universities are doing, and be able to learn from others. So we cannot give what we do not have. So we do research in order to be evidence-based in our in the way we deliver lessons and in the way we teach our students. We just have to understand their needs so that we can provide what we need to provide in terms of the as what Dr. Pedrito mentioned. We have to be experts. We cannot just be teachers, and we have to really learn in order to also we continue to relearn.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Sikino. And now it's your turn, Dr. Elmer Bondoc, for the final remarks or final thoughts.
As I've said a while back, we're all wounded teachers. And because of this wound that we actually have, it enables us to become better as a professional. The ways by which we find measures on actually heal this woundedness that we have, or what we call brokenness, will always give us the reality that one of the greatest characteristics molded by Christ in us would be humility. And that humility would always be directed in making us realize that we do not have the monopoly of everything, because we're also continuous learners. And that being said, as we are learning all together, we actually have to make this realization that we are not the ones limiting the capabilities of our students, because in our sworn profession as educators, we're supposed to be building this for them to be able to become equipped members of the society, functional, and more importantly, responsible at that. We have to make it a point that we give our dues to our students by becoming responsible educators. And that being said, we are very grateful for this opportunity to share. It has been a great pleasure to actually meet everyone in this virtual platform. As we say in our university, Laus Deo Semper, and praise to God always. Thank you very much.
Amen. Amen.
Amen. Okay, thank you so much, everybody. Okay, so well, again, a virtual round of applause for our outstanding keynote speaker, Dr. Helen Pleak, as well as our amazing panelists, Dr. Peds of University of Mindanao, Dr. Agnes of University of San Jose Recolectos, Dr. Paz of Philippine Normal University, and Dr. Elmer of Holy Angel Academy, Pampanga. And I and the rest of the audience got a lot of learning takeaways in today's session. And it's really such a fantastic day for all of us. Okay, so once again, thank you so much, everyone. And we appreciate you being with us today. Have a great rest of the day. And the floor is now yours, Jojo. Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that wraps up everything in our morning. And on behalf of Turnitin, we thank you for making the time in your busy schedules to join us here. And we hope you learned and enjoyed this session, and see you soon. For the panelists and also the speakers, I would like to invite you for a group picture for our socials. If you can just stay and open your cameras, our marketing team will be able to take a photo for us. Esty? Thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you, Jojo.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Nice meeting all of you here.
Who do we have here? We have okay. Oh, I think I still put
on cue, Bessie.
Oh yeah.
So everyone's smiling already. Sorry about that.
I know, but I can't really see it like in gallery view.
Do you want me to take a screenshot or?
Okay.
You can just
Okay. It's gallery view now. Okay. Sorry.
Sorry, I'm just gonna keep the chat record off, and I will take a screenshot properly.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Jojo.
3, 2, 1. Smile, everyone. Okay, and one more. Last. 3, 2, 1. Smile. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Already.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sir
Bye-bye.
Elmer, Miss Agnes, and also Miss Marifas. Thank you very much. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
team.
Bye-bye.
Hi, Brad.
Thank you,
Bye.
Turnitin.
Thank you,
Yes,
sir.
yes.
Thank
Helen,
you.
nice to meet you virtually.
Thank you, Ma'am Paz. Thank you, Sir Bondo.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.